It's been there, done that, is designing t-shirts and handing them out freely. Go again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I am very honored to be here today. What we have heard about this morning boils down to Ephesians 6:12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities and the rulers of darkness of this world, of wickedness in high places. And that's really what the battle is. And I am reminded that it was Pontius Pilate who said, "What is truth?" And we are here today to talk about truth. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, God opened up the doors 10.5 years ago for me to cover international meetings at the global level. I don't have time to talk about where I've been or what I've done, except to say, to date, I have covered 66 global meetings on every continent except China. That's next. I have been able to query and interview presidents and prime ministers, rulers of this world, key officials throughout the whole United Nations infrastructure, the World Health, the IMF, the World Bank. I have gone to numerous meetings such as trade, NATO, peacekeeping, abortion reduction meetings. I have gone to economic meetings. I have gone to a number of UN meetings, different types of UN meetings. I have gone the whole gambit. People say to me, "So how do you do what you do? How do you get in at these meetings?" I don't have any real answer except to say God. I never put this on my list of things to do. This was a course in which I chose to be obedient to the call of Jesus Christ. It was never a dream of mine to do what I'm doing. This is an avocation. And when I'm not covering global meetings, I manage money. And you know what? They go together. Power and principalities and what's happening with the money, they always say, follow the money. They all go together. I am very grateful to be here. Thank you, Pastor Butch. I am so busy doing so many things that, I don't really put myself out there. And so I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to be with you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share truth with you. My booth is over there in that corner. And I would like to just mention that I have a number of newsletters that I have brought for you to purchase, that some and all or part of what I'm going to be discussing is in my presentation today. There are several books. I only have one left of Fabian Freeway. You want to know about the takeover of America? There are many levels. This is an out-of-print book, but I have a number of issues that I have been able to secure. And I highly recommend it, of course, with my two books, as well as a book called The Roosevelt Red Record. If you want to know how we got, where we got, and where it was started, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was one of them. My goal today is to show you so that we can all understand the structure, players, and philosophies of world government. Has the world been integrated from individual nation states into one? Yes. And how did it happen? Well, obviously, you know some of the ways in which it happened. How could we get from an individual nation state into world government and not know it? Well, first of all, my surprise when I went on the international level was a media blackout. After being at my first UN meeting and coming home and reading all the newspaper accounts and reports and listening to TV, I realized there was a complete media blackout. Secondly, it's the dumbing down in schools. You all know that. It's not educating with regard to the isms. Why I didn't understand the agenda on the international level is because I didn't understand the difference between communism, socialism, Fabian socialism, Marxism, and yes, another ism. It's called capitalism. I now know a whole lot more than I did 10.5 years ago. We have also assumed that government is operating in our best interests. There has been a misleading of people by what I call coded language. You know, they use these phrases, but it has meaning to them and a different meaning to us. So we never know what they're saying. And I think this is extremely important. Taking over the PTA, the city council, the county council, the planning board, and the legal system. Exactly how did that happen? And it's in red because we're going to take a look. Creating an international level of government. Of course, that's the UN. And changing our philosophy and laws to reflect world government. So when we talk about taking over the PTA and the city county council, I'd like to read to you a quote. A man's socialistic desire must be keen enough to make him keen enough to actually prefer spending 2 or 3 nights a week speaking and debating or in picking up social information even in the most dingy way. It is at such lecturing and debating and work and on squalid little committees and ridiculous little delegations to conferences that the ordinary Fabian workman or clerk must qualify for his future seat on the town council, the school board, or perhaps the cabinet. This was Shaw. Now, the bottom line is, you know, while we have been going to church and while we have been attending to family, they've had a different agenda. And it's exactly as George Bernard Shaw said right here. So, in short, the world is in the middle of a communist takeover. That's the only way to say it. At every turn on the international level, it is based on Fabian socialism. And I think we need to understand the agenda and we need to understand the structure. So, of all the key players on the international level, most of them are socialists or Fabian socialists. And they held to socialist ideals. Why else would we be confronted with a philosophical structure and a power structure of world government, a system of control? That's really what we're talking about. Everything that is going on is controlled. The news media, things that happen, 9/11, what's happening overseas on the war zones around the world, it's all control. They know exactly what they're doing. It's only you and I that we are at a loss for words and we don't understand what they're doing. We're going to look at 3 things: globalization, the changing structures of government, and a changing philosophy. When we talk about globalization, many of you probably know this. I heard this term first in 1995, globalization, a globalizing world. And I thought, what in the world do they mean? And I put this definition together through constant change. Boutros Ghali told me that their agenda would be a new agenda of constant change. The blending together of economies, people, laws, politics, monies, and social ethics into one. The convergence or harmonization or homogenation of the world from an individual nation state into one world, a world without borders. And so today we're going to be talking about the world that we live in. John F. Kennedy said on July 4th, 1962, "I will say here and now on this day of independence, July 4th, that the U.S. will be ready for a declaration of interdependence, that we will be prepared to discuss with a united Europe the ways of forming a concrete Atlantic partnership." Now, another president said, "Instead of globalization, I prefer the term interdependence. We cannot escape each other. The challenge that will dominate the next few decades is to move this world of ours from interdependence to an integrated community with shared beliefs, shared values, and shared responsibilities." This was Bill Clinton several years ago. And I just heard him on the way down on the radio. The key word now is integrated. He talks about interdependence and he talks about integration, the new buzzwords. So what is the changing structure of government? How did we get there? On my journeys, it took me about 8 years to piece together the history of how this happened, some of the organizations involved, the actors involved, and to take a look at the structure. So, steps to an integrated world. Here is the United States with all the different walls that we have had throughout the years, the economic, the political, the trade, the legal, and the financial. So, what happened first? It was the financial integration in 1944 with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. They are called the Bretton Woods institutions. I forgot to mention something. I have found that Pastor Butch's audience is the most sophisticated and the most intelligent out of all the radio shows I have done. And so, I just want to say to you, you may know all of this already. What I am looking to do is connect the dots and give you the big picture as I see it from where I have been. We had the Bretton Woods institutions, obviously. They're now 60 years old this year. And it's interesting, as you all know, that the people who started it, Harry Dexter White was a communist spy, and John Maynard Keynes, the father of Keynesian economics, was a Fabian socialist. So we got off to a good start with our money, didn't we? The World Bank. Interestingly enough, the World Bank has something called the International Finance Corp. They go around the world and pretty much they have created stock exchanges in most of the third world countries, whether it's Ghana or Vietnam or China or Cambodia. They've gone in and they've created stock markets. And you know what they do? In order for a third world country to have something to list on the stock exchange, what they end up doing is privatizing government assets. That's the big rage. And so you have a government railroad company, and what they then do is they make it a private corporation and they list it on the new stock exchange. You know what the World Bank does to help them out? The World Bank buys 25% of the stock of all the new offerings. And the World Bank has done this in all the third world countries. You name the country, they've done it, they've been there. Do we see a picture? Loan guarantee programs. You ask the third world countries about loan guarantees, and you know that they're guaranteeing those loans with not only all their assets, but their babies as well. Sustainable development. We'll get into sustainable development. My first book was on sustainable development, Prince Charles, the Sustainable Prince. I never thought I'd write a book about Prince Charles. I didn't think I was going to marry him when I was 12. You know, at that time, I didn't look at big ears. I just thought he was cute. When I wrote my book about Prince Charles, I wasn't looking to understand that there was a major power occurring behind the United Nations. And I was shocked to find that the British royal family is a very, very major power player on the international level. And Prince Charles, he is no jerk. Now, yes, okay, he looks jerky, he acts jerky. They report him as being a jerk and a few other things. Bottom line is this man is absolutely brilliant. He is brilliant. And my book, Prince Charles, the Sustainable Prince, talks about his role as a major power behind the 1992 Rio Earth Summit being approved. Now, that was pretty major. You'll have to read my book to figure out and to learn about that. But Prince Charles also has been going around and changing the structures of government worldwide through public-private partnerships. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So, sustainable development, absolutely. The World Bank is there. They are also involved in really redesigning and changing the government structures in many countries to really reflect a world governmental system. And lastly, I already said that, they're already creating government in their image. What is the IMF doing? Well, they originally made loans to World War II war-torn countries. Now they're making loans to HIPC, highly indebted poor countries. There's a whole story about how they got highly indebted and poor. And maybe we ought to ask Robert McNamara, who headed up the World Bank, and all of the incredible developmental projects that he had back in the 60s and 70s. Most of them became white elephants. And so these third world countries that didn't have money to blow now literally pay about 95% of the revenues from their various mineral resources, whether it's South Africa or several of the other countries in Africa that have diamonds and titanium and uranium and gold. 95% of the proceeds are being paid to the World Bank for their loans. And so here on the other side, we now have the IMF making other loans to these poor countries. And by the way, the Group of 8 meeting this year in Scotland, they will center on Africa and how to help all these highly indebted poor countries. They also set up the world economies. It was their goal to manage the economies of the world to help move them into a borderless world. In 1967, the IMF created its own currency called special drawing rights. How many of you are familiar with special drawing rights? Do we have anybody? No. Special drawing rights is a common currency. It's the top 5 currencies of the world. And I did an interview with Paul Volcker, and I'm getting ahead of myself. And Paul Volcker said that what we needed in an international world was an international currency. And I shot back at him, special drawing rights. And he said, oh, no, something else. And then he turned his back on me, and that was it. If you knew that guy's almost 7 foot tall, you would know what that means to somebody who's 5 foot. Exactly, that's exactly what it means. Interestingly enough, the special drawing right is being adopted most recently by the Bank for International Settlements in Basel. So stay tuned. In 1974, it adopted guidelines to manage a floating exchange rate system. Do you know where that exchange rate system came from? That was when Nixon took the dollar off of gold, and for the first time in all of history, the monetary system of the world floated. And here we have the IMF adopting guidelines to help this new system of exchange rates. Where do you think currency volatility comes from? In 1980, in looking to change the monetary system of the world, if you're going to have an integrated world, you have to integrate the currencies of the world. And in 1980, the Monetary Control Act was passed, otherwise known as the Monetary Deregulation Act, and it has another very, very long name. And what that law did was basically it opened up all the barriers, not only in America, it opened up the barriers in America for Americans to invest overseas. Before 1980, we couldn't do that. And so it resulted in $1.9 trillion moving around the world on a daily basis, looking for the highest return, the quickest play. So how does that look? Looks just like that. We have an integration of money around the world. At the same time the United States was passing the 1980 Monetary Deregulation Act, the other G7 countries were passing very similar laws. So it started to open up the world from a global investment standpoint. And that is when many of your foreign and global mutual funds came into being. So that 1.9, it was about 1.2, and then it's about 1.9 trillion. I thought it was up to 2.2, but some genius of an economist let me know it's still 1.9. What does this lead to? When you start integrating the monies of the world, it leads to a completely global system of money. Global business, global accounting, the International Accounting Standards Board. I started tracking this in 1995. The idea that they were looking to change the accounting standards around the world and internationalize them. And the United States in the last year or two has just adopted International Accounting Standards Board, IASB principles. And what is happening with many of the corporations around the world is that they are now adopting those standards. There's a form of harmonization of global taxation on cross-border transactions. There's a global stock exchange that's coming into being, global trade with global custody agreements, global commodities exchanges, and the U.S. Commodities Future Trading Commission is now hooked up between Chicago and London. I mentioned the global accounting standards. I just read this the other day in the Financial Times. that BHP Billiton, which is an Australian company, has just reported their new earnings according to International Financial Standing, IASB standards. So we're seeing a complete change there. There's been a change politically. In 1945, we have the barriers between the nation states being reduced with the United Nations. As you all know, it's a international body. We've lost our political sovereignty when we sent a ambassador to the United Nations, because they then make decisions for you and I that transcend the national barriers of the world. As you know, that there is within there one vote per country. The first Secretary General, Alger Hiss. I ended up in one of my early meetings sitting next to a man who was the special assistant to Alger Hiss at the founding of the United Nations. And I gathered up my courage because I was just starting in this business. And I did an interview with him. And unfortunately, my tape, I've learned a lot about being a reporter. My tape recorder, the batteries ran out. And there I am doing this very important, he was, the guys I interview are always tall. So here I am, And I looked and I saw that it wasn't being taped, but I said to him, Alger Hiss was indicted as being a communist spy. And this man, God bless him, he's probably a Methodist, said, "Oh no, they said so many horrible things about him, but he was the most wonderful man there was." Moving on. The United Nations Charter, as you know, is based on the Russian Constitution. It's so different from the Russian Charter, it's so different from the U.S. Constitution. We all know that under the UN Charter, the rights come from government. They are limited. They can be taken away. And basically, it's a whole feudalistic system compared to the freedoms that our forefathers built for you and I in the Constitution. What does the United Nations have? It has a head of state. It has a governing body. It has its own currency. Aha, the special drawing rights. It has a treasury system with the IMF World Bank. It has its own court and legal systems. It has its own policing mechanism with peacekeeping. It has its own oath of allegiance and its own charter. And lastly, they are working on a global tax and a global currency. So what does this look like to you? The World Parliament represents all the countries of the world, 191 of them. They meet there in the General Assembly. And I've met there as well with some other meetings that have been held there. So no matter the size of every country has one vote. They're all equal. So the U.S., our vote is equal to Cuba or Andorra, which is one of the smallest countries in the world. However, did you know that there's one country that has more votes than the rest of us? It's called the Commonwealth, the British Commonwealth. I just did this research recently, and I was amazed. I have a newsletter back there about it. The Commonwealth has 54 countries. It is the only organization allowed to operate within the United Nations system, the whole system. And as such, that means the Commonwealth has 54 votes, the possibility of 54 votes. But of course, I'm sure the Queen would not mandate that they all vote the same way, but guess what? 2 votes outvotes America. International settlements, 38. The Global Organization for Insurance Companies, IAIS, has 27. The group of 8, at the group of 8, there are 2 votes, Canada and UK against America. We have the United Nations, as I mentioned, 54, the IMF with 45, the WTO with 46, and the World Bank with 44. The United Nations in 1990 held what they called the Millennium Summit. Now, you need to pay close attention to this. This is extremely important. And in the Millennium Summit, it was for the first time since 1945 that the United Nations was given a complete overhaul. They were given great powers. The kings, the presidents, the princes and prime ministers of this world went to New York and they agreed on the following. They gave empowerments to the UN. They strengthened international law. They gave the United Nations the right to add an elected International House of Representatives. The idea being that at some point in the future, you and I are going to be able to elect our own UN representative. Isn't that exciting? They allowed the Security Council for the first time to authorize action inside a sovereign nation state. Now, I have a newsletter back there called The Reform of the UN. You really have to get it because all of the future philosophies that they are trying to explain that you and I need to adopt are in that report. They gave the United Nations the right for a global tax. They gave the United Nations the right to establish a global rapid deployment force. And they gave the United Nations trustees, they gave the UN trusteeship over the global commons. Now, the global commons are the oceans, the seas, the sky, space. Okay? Now, let's think about this for a minute. You know, when Christopher Columbus and all of the explorers came to this hemisphere, they planted a flag on dry ground, and they said, this now belongs to Britain or France or England or whoever. Oh, or Spain, I meant. The United Nations did something really incredible. They just took control. And they said, the global commons don't belong to anybody, but we need to protect it. Isn't that brilliant? They also passed a number of social mandates. They said by 2015, they wanted to reduce the number of people living in poverty by 50%. They wanted to reduce HIV/AIDS. They wanted to aid the highly indebted poor countries, HIPC. By the way, if you do a study, and I have a newsletter about the British Commonwealth, the majority of HIPC countries that get more votes in the whole international infrastructure than the U.S. happen to be part of the Commonwealth. So when we bail out the HIPC countries, I want to know where that money's going, because it surely ain't going to the poor countries. They passed universal education for all. I'm very pleased to tell you that on Monday, the United States State Department is hosting their first UNESCO conference in 20 years, and yours truly is going. I didn't do it for that reason. I was just letting you know that when it comes to education, when it's close to home, I go to as many freebies as I can. They also want clean water and sanitation. And in fact, Mikhail Gorbachev was just at the UN about 2-3 weeks ago talking on behalf of clean water. All right? They want to improve the lives of 200 million, however many there are, slum dwellers in the world. So how are they going to pay for this? Global tax. I started covering the United Nations in 1995 because when I came home from my first meeting and went through a huge suitcase full of material, I found one piece of information that showed me that at the follow-up meeting to Cairo in Copenhagen, they were going to float the idea of a global tax. 10.5 years later, they've had to figure out how they're going to ask the people of the world to give them a global tax. So the global tax will pay for all those things that I just mentioned. So how much will it cost for these MDGs, Millennium Development Goals? You really need to remember some of these terms. Well, it's $50 billion a year up until next year, when inflation says that it will rise to $66 billion, and by 2015 it'll be $150 billion. Okay? Now, at the last IMF World Bank meeting that I was at, which is in, I think April, it could have been end of March, it was April anyway, the powers at the IMF World Bank have agreed that they would like to test 2 forms of global taxation. Now, this historic, innovative idea will now go to the G8 meeting in Scotland in July, and then to the 5-year follow-up to the Millennium Summit at the United Nations in the fall. Now, what did President Clinton say? Excuse me, it could be President Clinton. Okay, Bush hasn't been any different than Clinton. What did President Bush say about the idea of the Millennium Development Goals? America supports the International Development Goals and the UN Millennium Document. We have signed off. So, what do the Millennium Development Goals constitute and the global tax that they want? It's the greatest transfer of wealth in history. And I ask you, what organization is going to monitor where the money goes from the global tax? There ain't any. So, we have, as I mentioned, an international structure. We have the United Nations with 191 countries. And in 1975, the Group of 8, well, it started out at the Group of 5, then it was the Group of 7 for a number of years. Now it's the Group of 8. The Group of 8 came into being. Now, they came into being as a result of Nixon taking the dollar off the gold standard. So it was birthed out of chaos, and they have become the catalyst for moving the world into world government. When the Group of 8 meets, believe me, they have their own cabinet, whether it's the G7 finance ministers, because Russia's not a member yet, or the G8 transportation leaders, or the G8 foreign ministers, or the G8 education health and human services ministers. Okay, they have their own cabinet, these 8 men who rule the world. They became the designer of world government, and what we need to understand is they've not only facilitated globalization, they've acted as a global board of directors, but now they started because of the fact that Nixon took the world off of the gold standard. And so they started from an economic standpoint. Now they have gone into every area of government. And Tony Blair said in 1998, when the Group of 8 met in England, that, guess what? We all have the same domestic problems. I think we need to work together domestically. They have facilitated the entry of corporations as partners in helping governments. Everybody wants the money of a multinational corporation. Of course, they support all the UN goals, and they have facilitated some of the final touches. Last year at the Group of 8 meeting in Sea Island, Georgia, it was the Bush administration that announced that they were setting up for the first time a peacekeeping force for Africa of 75,000 troops. And I thought, you know, I've heard this before. So I raised my hand. I was the only one to ask this question. And I said, excuse me, in 2000, the United Nations was given the right for a rapid deployment force of 42,000 troops. Is this the same thing? And the Bush administration official said, well, yeah, it is. I said, can they be sent anywhere in the world? Well, yes, they can be sent anywhere in the world. And now we have the 2 global taxes that will go to them in a month. In 1994, the trade barriers between the nation states fell. And what we have with regard to the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, it was 27,000 pages long. It was a lame duck Congress. And basically what it did was it removed all the barriers between the countries of the world. The WTO has its own court with the power to fine, as you can read in the newspaper. And for the first time, a businessman in the United States or a businessman in South Africa or South America or Vietnam or Cambodia or China no longer just compete with their counterpart across the street or across the state or province. But everybody now competes globally, bottom line. And that's not just a businessman, it's everyone. The United Nations, the WTO, have 16 key areas of trade integration, 27,000 pages. They have a lot of details there. And what we now have and what's coming up is the reduction of agricultural subsidies, not only in Europe, but here in the United States. Think what that will do. We already have an onslaught of very cheap products coming from China. And I mean, the textile industries, the manufacturing industries, okay, now it's agriculture. Now, the WTO is part of a global trade, but in order to make the world more manageable, they decided to put the world into regional trading zones. And so we have the free trade areas of the Americas, now called the Americas on the left. We have the European Union in the green in the middle. We have the Middle East that they're trying to get together. We have NEPAD, which is the new economic partnership for Africa, which Clinton helped in South Africa, and we have Asia with APEC and ASEAN that are now the regional trading councils. In our hemisphere, as we talked about the free trade areas of the Americas, you got to have something to trade. And so what they're really doing is destroying a lot of the farming in America so that we can now open up the gates for agriculture to come from Latin America. Now, I just want to make mention, I have an economic newsletter back there that talks about the rise of China and the fact that China is building a very major, powerful base in all of Latin America. And so, you know what they're doing? They're using America's free trade principles. And they're saying, yeah, we want to trade with Venezuela and Brazil and Ecuador, and we want to trade with the Bahamas. And so if you get that newsletter, it talks about that. So we have free trade. A very famous man who will be identified in a moment as Stalin said, divide the world into regional groups as a transition stage to world government. Populations will more readily abandon their national loyalties to a vague regional loyalty than they will for world authority. Later, the regions can be brought all the way into a single world dictatorship. Do you see what I see? We are in the middle of a transition. And in order to do that, they have to do it with our currency. So if you take a look at the dollar, we are now down to 66 cents on the euro and about $1.07 on the yen. From 1971, the value of the dollar has dropped over 66% between these two currencies. I mentioned earlier that I did an interview with Paul Volcker, and here he is with Gerald Corrigan, who also ran the New York Federal Reserve, and I took that photograph at the Bretton Woods Committee meeting last year. And that's when I asked him about a global currency. And so that's what they're working on, as I mentioned. I want to go into something else with regard to regionalism. It's called regional government. And it was Richard Nixon who said, let us give the people of America a chance, a bigger voice in deciding for themselves those questions that so greatly affect their lives. He said that in 1971 in his annual State of the Union speech. And God bless John Rarick and all of his kin. He said in response to what Nixon said, which is only part of the speech, of course, power to the people is a slogan used not only by radical socialists in their plans to communize America, but also by President Nixon in his new American Revolution. And you all know that he did start a revolution because he set up regional government by Executive Order 11647. You also know that he said, to understand regional government, it is necessary to know what metropolitan government or metro involves. Because metro regional government are the same. Government of an area or region by a central body of appointed officials who have unlimited and unconstitutional power. The bottom line is that They are changing, as you know, the whole structure of local government, county government, state government, so that they're superimposing metro government or metropolitan government over those areas. And metropolitan government is elected government in which there is no representation of government. And this really steps into international government. I just got a book from the United Nations Habitat, and it goes into what they expect for cities and governments in the future on the local and county level. Nixon also restructured the cabinet, and he changed all the lines of power and authority which centralized decision-making at the White House. And as you know, from them, most presidents have built on that. Regionalism. I think it was Kofi Annan who said this. The UN must prepare for a time when regionalism becomes more ascendant worldwide and even helps the process. The Secretary General has called repeatedly for a strengthening of regionalism in global governance, which is part of the evolution of human efforts to organize life on the planet. Excuse me, that was our global neighborhood, which came out about 1995, 1996. So we're being regionalized. The legal barriers came down in 1998 and 2001. In 1998, the International Criminal Court was birthed. For the first time since Rome, an international authority has the ability to transcend the sovereignty of a country to arrest, to search and arrest an alleged international criminal. And of course, we know about 9/11. The World Economic Forum moved from Davos to New York for their 2002 meeting. And I was there, and I was able to ask a number of key people, in light of 9/11, is it time to internationalize our police force? Senator Bob Graham said, it showed us what the consequences were of non-assistance across international borders. It is time to internationalize our police forces. Former Senator Sam Nunn, who now works for Ted Turner, said, I think so, both in this country and abroad. I interviewed the Secretary General of Interpol, Ron Noble, who's an American, and I said the same thing. And he said, before we harmonize laws, we need to have communication between the world's police. And so we are seeing a complete shift of what's happening, FBI training centers around the world. It's amazing, as you know. Lastly, there was the financial integration. And there are a number of countries in which different things happened with regard to financial integration. Nixon, the Group of Five, now the Group of Eight, banking deregulation, which we talked about, the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act and Sarbanes-Oxley, and a number of other things that are happening. So when there are no more borders, it is easy to control the world. And we are on target for a global stock exchange. I have been monitoring this. In fact, I even write about it in United Nations Global Straitjacket. So one day I was sitting at my desk and I was trying to figure out the structures of the world. And so I said, let me take a look at the cabinet. And so at the bottom there, you have all the positions of the cabinet. Guess what? Position for position, it lines up with the different parts, commissions, organs, councils of the United Nations. Are we surprised? Carol Quigley said, create a world system of financial control in private hands able to dominate the political system of each country and economy. And as you know, the apex, as we talked a moment ago, is the Bank for International Settlements. Every country has a private organization, a private corporation that runs the monetary system of that country. That's why you and I, we the taxpayer, will pay interest in perpetuity to the Federal Reserve, which meets at the Bank for International Settlements in Basel. I want to show you something with regard to what's happening. All right? We have the Bank for International Settlements where all the central banks of the world meet. We have an organization called the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, IAIS. That's like a UN of insurance supervisors from all the countries of the world. And then we have, as I mentioned earlier, IOSCO, the International Organization of Security Commissions, which is like a United Nations for stock exchanges. All right? Let's take a look at what's happening here. We all know, if you'll just follow the Bank for International Settlements to the Basel Committee for Banking Supervision, which is a very powerful committee completely changing the structure of banking worldwide, they came up with Know Your Customer. You all know about that, right? Well, they also created something called financial conglomerates. And the financial conglomerates merges banks, brokerage companies, and insurance companies into one. Not since 1929 have banks been allowed to offer stocks and bring them to market as well as sell insurance. So I want to show you what this means. Okay? We now have these financial conglomerates. In 1999, the Congress passed H.R. 10, which is the Banking Modernization Act. It repealed the Glass-Steagall Act. The Glass-Steagall Act was put in place to protect you and I, the investor, as a result of the 1929 stock crash. All right? They repealed it. They took it away. What did they really do? They re-merged the whole entire U.S. banking system so that it conforms to pre-1929 conditions. Did we see this recently? Citigroup. What is Citigroup comprised of? They lend, such as Enron off-balance sheets. Brokerage, such as they have a number of brokerage companies that they bought out. You have Grubman and Abby Joseph Cohen that would be saying, yeah, buy this NASDAQ stock while they sold it. Remember that? And then they also have the investment banking, which is where they bring stocks to market. It's all back pre-1929. What is the bottom line? Congress sold us out. The end of our international, our own economic sovereignty. Now, I've got to move and fly because I have 5 minutes. So I'm gonna press this little button as quick as I can, because I want you to see that what happened in 1992 is that the world was moved from a pre-Christian worldview where man had dominance over the earth to a pagan philosophy through, this was the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. And again, Prince Charles played a major role behind the scenes to get this agenda to fly. The world now has dominance over man. Sustainable development says there are too many people on the planet. We can't feed all these people. We have to reduce them. And the Earth's resources must be preserved and conserved. And guess what? The UN is the only global organization in a position to do this. And so, what are they going to do? Terry Schiavo is only the beginning. Whether it's famine, disease, what Dave and Joyce talked about, wars, genocide, condoms, abortion, late-term abortions, homosexuality, the whole 9 yards. This is what sustainable development means. So we have the Earth's resources must be preserved and conserved. This is the new communism. This is the new environmentalism for the 21st century. Sustainable development, in doing a number of interviews, they basically told me that sustainable development is a merger between capitalism and communism. I was at my desk one day, I spent a lot of time at my desk, and I said, Lord, where does sustainable development come from? And I was logically thinking, well, it's not in our Constitution. It's the opposite of our Constitution. The Russian Constitution. And I just happened to have a copy of the Russian Constitution. It was the 1977. And I started reading it. Chapter 2, Article 18 describes sustainable development. And I'm going to fly through some of this because I only have 5 minutes, and you're going to have to tell them you want me to have another 5 out of grace. But we have a situation whereby, what is Fabian socialism? Communism is where you go into a country and you take it by force overnight. Fabian socialism says, no, let's do it slowly. Let's change the minds of people first. And that's what's been happening. Members, Fabian socialists, as I mentioned, John Maynard Keynes, George Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, Julian Huxley. The London School of Economics is where they school everybody in Fabian socialism. John Kennedy spent time there. And we have a situation whereby many of the people who are in our government have relied on socialists and communists. Then what happened was Friedrich von Hayek came in and he said, oh, no. It's not Keynesian economics where you deficit spend because every level of government is broke. What we need now is a market-based type of economy where government spins off all their assets. Hello? So we have Keynesian economics, which bankrupted the governments of the world. And now we have a new theory used by everybody from Reagan to Bush 2 that says, hey, let's just spin off the assets of government. And so what we now have, and you're going to have to buy the newsletter that talks about this, we have Bill Clinton, who paved the way for downsizing government through reinventing government, which is public-private partnership. And I mentioned Charles. What is a public-private partnership? First of all, yes, it is fascism. You read my book, thank you. It's a partnership. It is a business arrangement. You can have as many partners as you want. You can change it whenever you want. It's a partnership. There are two kinds of partners. You have public, which is government, all levels of government, including foreign government. You have business, which is private, the multinational corporations, because guess what? Government's broke, and the corporations have the money. And then you throw in the non-governmental organizations because their role is to bring the new mandates and the changes down to you and I. Now, when I was doing my book and doing some speaking about public-private partnership, Clinton was still president. And I thought, what happens? Let's see what we have here. President Clinton leaves office. He sets up a foundation. So here we have the Slick Willie Foundation. All right? Guess what? Clinton left office, and he set up the William Jefferson Clinton Foundation. You know what he's now doing? He is setting up public-private partnerships all over the world. So, what do you have with a public-private partnership? You have a complete loss of freedom. You have a complete shift in the assets that government used to have. You have fascism. You have something more than that. You have no representation. No, we've lost our representation. Every time they set up a public-private partnership, we lose representative government. Because what are they doing? Public-private partnerships are your sewers, water, your electrical, everything that they can do, they're basically setting up a public-private partnership. And what does it mean? It's a transfer of wealth. It is a transfer of wealth. And it's the open door to communism. I am not done, but I see Dave over there, and you know what? Dave is taller than 5 feet. Okay. What do I want to say in conclusion? I want to say this. What is our answer? And our answer, and I don't want to sound trite, our answer is a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. You see, on the back of my book, Global Straitjacket, I basically said that Jesus Christ was birthed in the middle of world government. The early church was birthed in the middle of world government. But they recognized it. They understood it. They worked around it without becoming part of it. Yeah. What we need today, what you already have, but what everybody else needs, is they need a knowledge and understanding of what is happening so that they do not become part of it. Knowledge is power. But guess what? Something the apostles understood, that no matter what happens, there is freedom in Jesus Christ. And so it is up to us to become more holy and more righteous before God, to get rid of our hidden sins, our secret sins, all right? To come boldly to the throne of grace so that we have something more important and more powerful to fight world government and the evil that we see today, the tyranny that is all around us, the hideous evil, and that is we have the power that only comes from the Holy Spirit. And we literally have the ability to stamp on scorpions. And so I would like to thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.